Ethan sat on the edge of his old truck, wiping sweat from his forehead as the late afternoon sun beat down on him. His hands were rough, covered in cuts from years of working construction jobs, odd repairs, and whatever else he could find. It had been a long week already, and it was only Wednesday. He had patched 2 fences, replaced a broken water heater, and spent the morning fixing someone's porch, all while worrying about how to pay next month's rent. In the small town he lived in, work wasn't steady. People called when they needed something, but days often went by without a single job. Since his wife passed away 3 years ago, it was just him and his little girl, Lily. She was 7 now, bright, sweet, and full of questions about the world. He tried to answer them all, even when he didn't have the answers himself. That afternoon, as he packed his tools, his phone buzzed with a weather alert. A major storm was heading straight for their town. The radio said heavy rain, strong winds, maybe even flooding. Ethan sighed, looking up at the gray clouds already forming on the horizon. Storms meant damage, and damage meant more work, but also danger. He looked over at his daughter sitting in the passenger seat, legs swinging, humming a tune from school. "Looks like we've got a storm coming, kiddo," he said. "Will it be bad?" She asked, eyes wide. "Maybe," he said, giving her a small smile. "But we'll be fine. We always are." He started the engine and drove slowly through the winding back roads toward home. As he passed a cluster of old farmhouses, he noticed one with shingles missing and parts of the roof sagging. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years. He almost kept driving, but something made him stop. He knew if that roof didn't get fixed, it might not survive the coming storm. He hesitated, tapping the steering wheel. He needed to get home, to make sure their own little house was ready for the rain. But something in his gut told him to check on whoever lived there. He pulled into the dirt driveway, the tires crunching over gravel. Lily looked at him curiously. "Are we stopping here?" "Just for a minute," he said, grabbing his tool bag. "Roof's in bad shape. I'll see if they need help." The house looked old but well cared for in its own way. The porch was clean and a few flower pots lined the steps, though most were empty. He climbed the steps and knocked gently. For a moment, there was no answer. He was about to turn back when the door creaked open. An elderly woman stood there. Her hair was silver, tied in a loose bun, and her eyes were sharp but kind. She wore a faded sweater and looked surprised to see him. "Afternoon, ma'am," Ethan said, taking off his cap politely. "I couldn't help noticing your roof. The storm coming tonight might hit hard, and that roof looks like it could use some patching." The woman gave a small, polite smile. "Oh, I know, but I'll be fine. I've lived through plenty of storms here." Ethan nodded, though he could see the worry in her eyes. "Still, it wouldn't take me long. Just a few spots need fixing. I can do it cheap, just enough to hold until the weather clears." She hesitated. "I don't really have the money to pay for repairs right now." "Then don't," Ethan said simply. "I'll do it anyway. I've got my tools with me, and it's the right thing to do." The woman stared at him for a moment, surprised. Then she nodded slowly. "If you really want to, I won't stop you. But at least let me make you a cup of tea after." "That sounds fair," he said with a grin. He went back to the truck, told Lily to stay inside where it was warm, and got to work. The roof was worse than it looked. Some boards were soft and a few nails had rusted through. But he moved quickly, hammering, cutting, and replacing what he could. The wind was starting to pick up already, and dark clouds rolled across the sky. As he worked, he thought about how strange life had become. 3 years ago, he had a steady job, a wife who always left notes on the fridge, and a small but happy home. Then cancer took her, and everything fell apart. He tried to hold things together for Lily, but some days it felt like trying to build a house in a storm. Every time he fixed one thing, something else broke. Still, he kept going. That was all he knew how to do. After about 2 hours, he climbed down, wiping the sweat from his brow. The woman came out carrying 2 mugs of tea on a small tray. "You work fast," she said, handing him one. "It looks solid. Should hold through the storm," he said, taking a sip. "Might need a full repair later, but this'll keep the water out." She nodded thoughtfully. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," he said quietly. "But I couldn't just drive by." She smiled, looking down at her hands. "People don't usually stop anymore. Used to be folks in town looked after each other. Now everyone just minds their own business." Ethan shrugged. "Guess I'm old-fashioned." They stood in silence for a moment, listening to the wind rustling through the trees. "Do you live nearby?" she asked, about 15 minutes down the road. Just me and my little girl. The woman looked over at the truck where Lily sat drawing on a notepad. She looked sweet. Takes after her father, I imagine. He chuckled. She's the reason I get up in the morning. I just want her to have something better one day. The woman nodded slowly. You will give her that. You've got good hands and a good heart. Those go a long way. When he finished his tea, she thanked him again and handed him a small envelope. I know you said no payment, but please take this. For gas, at least. He started to refuse, but she looked so earnest he finally accepted it. All right, thank you. But if you ever need anything else, you call me. I mean it. As he turned to go, the woman said softly, Be careful tonight. This storm feels different, he nodded. We'll stay safe. Back in the truck, he started the engine as the first drops of rain began to fall. Lily looked at him curiously. Who is that lady? Just someone who needed a hand, he said. Sometimes people just need a little help. She looked nice, Lily said. She is, he replied with a smile. Reminds me of your grandma. They drove home as the rain grew heavier. The sky darkened quickly and thunder rolled in the distance. Ethan glanced at the envelope on the seat beside him. When he opened it later that night, he found a single $20 bill and a note that simply read, Kindness never goes unpaid. Thank you. He folded the note and slipped it into his wallet beside an old photo of his wife. That night, as he tucked Lily into bed, she asked, Do you think the lady's roof will be okay? I think it will, he said, brushing her hair back. We fixed it up good. He sat by the window for a while after she fell asleep, watching the rain pour down. The wind howled through the trees, and lightning flashed across the sky. But he felt strangely calm. He had done what he could, and that was enough. The next morning, the storm was worse than anyone expected. Roads were starting to flood, power lines were down, and the wind tore branches from trees. Ethan kept checking the news, growing more anxious as he heard reports of houses damaged across town. He thought about the old woman's house, the sagging roof, the shaky beams, and a knot formed in his stomach. He told himself it was probably fine, but something didn't sit right. By evening, the rain hadn't let up. The phone lines were down and his truck barely had enough gas to get far. Still, he kept looking out the window toward the direction of that farmhouse, wondering if she was all right. He didn't know it yet, but that simple act of kindness, stopping to fix a stranger's roof, was about to change his and Lily's lives forever. What he saw and learned in the days ahead would test his courage, shake his beliefs, and open a door to a life he never imagined he'd have. The storm came harder than anyone expected. By late night, the wind screamed outside like a train passing through the trees, and rain slammed against the windows. Ethan sat awake on the couch listening to every sound. He couldn't sleep, not with the storm raging the way it was. The lights flickered a few times, then finally went out. Great, he muttered under his breath. He grabbed the flashlight from the drawer and checked on Lily. She was fast asleep, curled up in her blanket, her small hand gripping her stuffed rabbit. Seeing her peaceful face gave him a bit of calm. He sat by the window watching as branches bent and debris flew down the street. His mind wandered back to the old farmhouse and the woman who lived there. He told himself she was fine, that the patch he'd done on the roof would hold. But still, a quiet worry sat in the pit of his stomach. Something about her calmness that afternoon, like she had weathered so many storms alone, kept echoing in his mind. The next morning, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the damage was clear. Yards were flooded, power lines were down, and pieces of roofs littered the streets. Ethan stepped outside, boots sinking into the wet ground. He checked around his small house first. Just a few shingles missing, nothing major. That was a relief. He turned to see Lily standing in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. Is it over? She asked sleepily. For now, he said with a tired smile. We made it. Are we going to be okay? He crouched down to her level. We'll be fine. You hungry? She nodded, and he found some cereal and milk from the cooler. As they ate, his thoughts kept going back to that farmhouse. He told himself again to let it go, but he couldn't. Something in his gut told him to check on her. After breakfast, he filled a small thermos with coffee, packed a few tools in the truck, and told Lily to grab her raincoat. Where are we going? She asked, curiosity in her voice. To make sure someone's all right, he said. The drive was slow. Many roads were blocked by fallen branches, and the fields on either side were flooded. The sky was still gray, heavy with leftover clouds. When he finally turned onto the old dirt road leading to the farmhouse, he noticed something strange. The big oak tree near the entrance had fallen, blocking part of the path. He parked the truck and walked the rest of the way, Lily holding his hand. The house came into view and his heart sank. Part of the porch roof had collapsed and one of the upper windows was shattered. The whole place looked battered by the storm. He ran forward, shouting, "Hello? Are you okay?" No answer. He knocked hard on the door. Still nothing. Then from somewhere inside he heard a faint sound, a soft call. He pushed the door open and stepped in carefully. The inside of the house smelled damp, but it was tidy. He called again, and this time the voice came clearer. It was the old woman. She was sitting near the back, holding her leg and surrounded by pieces of broken wood. "Oh no," Ethan said, rushing over. "Are you hurt?" "I'm all right, dear," she said with a shaky voice. "The porch gave way when I went to check the damage. I think I twisted my ankle." He crouched beside her, gently checking her leg. It wasn't broken, but it was swollen. "You need to rest that," he said. "Let me help you out of here." "I didn't want to bother anyone," she said, embarrassed. "I thought it would pass." "You should have called for help," he said softly. "The phone lines are down." He nodded. "Figures. Come on, lean on me." He helped her stand, carefully supporting her weight as they made their way outside. The ground was muddy, and the air was thick with the smell of wet earth. He got her into the truck, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, and handed her the thermos of coffee. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You didn't have to come all the way out here." "Couldn't just sit home wondering if you were okay," he said, starting the truck. Lily turned from the back seat and smiled shyly. "Hi," she said. The woman smiled back, her face softening. "Hello, sweetheart. You must be his little helper." Lily nodded proudly. "We came to save you." The woman chuckled, though it hurt to move. "Well, I'm very glad you did." Ethan took her to the small town clinic. The nurse there wrapped her ankle and gave her pain medicine. She thanked Ethan over and over, but he waved it off. "It's no trouble," he said. "You shouldn't be alone until the roads are clear." "I'll manage," she said stubbornly. He shook his head. "At least stay at our place for the night. We've got power, and Lily will enjoy the company." After a moment, she agreed. He helped her into the truck again, and they drove home slowly. The roads were still slick, but the sky was beginning to lighten. Back at the house, Lily ran inside to make space on the couch while Ethan brought in a few blankets. The woman sat down with a sigh, looking around the small living room. It was simple but cozy. Family photos on the wall, a small table, a few plants by the window. "This is lovely," she said softly. "It's not much," Ethan said, "but it's home." "It feels like one," she replied with a smile. Lily sat beside her and started asking questions about her house, her flowers, what kind of cookies she liked. The woman laughed and answered each one with patience. Ethan watched them, something warm growing in his chest. It had been a long time since his home felt that full of life. Later that evening, after dinner, the woman sat quietly by the fire. The light flickered across her face, showing lines of age and wisdom. "Your wife isn't with you?" she asked gently. Ethan hesitated, then shook his head. "No, she passed away a few years back." The woman's eyes softened. "I'm sorry. That must have been hard." "It was," he said honestly. "Still is. But I have Lily, and that keeps me going." "You've done well," she said, smiling. "You can tell when a child feels loved. She shines." He looked over at his daughter playing with her crayons on the floor. "Yeah, she's the best thing that ever happened to me." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the rain still pattering on the roof. Then she turned to him. "You're a good man, Ethan. Most people would have just driven by." He shrugged. "Maybe. But I couldn't. My dad used to say, if you see a problem you can fix, don't wait for someone else to do it. I guess that stuck." The woman smiled faintly. "He raised you right." He noticed her looking around the room again, her eyes lingering on the small family photo on the shelf. "You remind me of my husband," she said softly. "He was like that too. Always helping people, never asking for anything in return." Ethan smiled. "Sounds like a good man." "The best," she said, her voice distant. "He passed away many years ago. Since then, it's just been me and the memories of what we built together." Ethan didn't know what to say. He just nodded, understanding that kind of quiet loneliness. That night, after Lily went to bed, he made sure the woman was comfortable on the couch with extra blankets. She thanked him again and said, "You've done more for me in 2 days than most people have in years." He smiled. "You'd do the same for someone else, I bet." "Maybe once," she said softly. "But the world has changed. People rush too much to notice who needs help." He sat for a moment, staring into the fire. "Yeah," he said quietly. "But maybe it doesn't have to stay that way." She smiled faintly, closing her eyes. "Maybe not." As she drifted off to sleep, Ethan watched the flames flicker, feeling a strange sense of peace. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel so alone. The next morning, the woman insisted on returning home. The roads were clearing, and she said she needed to see the house for herself. Ethan didn't like the idea, but agreed to drive her. Lily packed her a small basket of muffins and apples for the trip. When they reached the farmhouse, the sun was finally out, shining over the wet fields. The house looked beaten, but still standing strong. The woman sighed with relief. "It's still here," she said softly. Ethan helped her inside, making sure she could walk around safely. She touched the walls as she moved, as if greeting an old friend. "This house has seen a lot," she said. "I've lived here more than 50 years. My husband built it with his own hands." "It's a good house," Ethan said. "Just needs a few repairs, but it's solid." She nodded, smiling faintly. "And so are you." Before he left, she reached out and held his hand. "Thank you, Ethan, you've been a blessing." He smiled. Just doing what anyone should. But deep down, he didn't realize that what he saw as a small act of kindness had already set something much bigger in motion, something that would soon change everything. He thought he knew about the quiet woman in that farmhouse, and when the truth came out, he would understand why fate had brought him to that broken roof just in time. The sun had been shining for 2 days now, but the town was still recovering from the storm. Roads were being cleared, roofs were being repaired, and people were finally stepping outside again. Ethan spent his mornings fixing fences for a neighbor and helping patch a few houses nearby. It was tiring, but after what the storm had done, he was just grateful things weren't worse. Still, every now and then his mind drifted back to the old farmhouse and the woman he had helped. He had stopped by once more to check on her, and she'd been doing fine, sitting by her porch with her leg propped up, sipping tea and insisting she was healing quickly. She'd even laughed, saying he should worry more about his own roof than hers, but something about her lingered in his thoughts. There was a mystery about her, like she carried 1,000 stories behind those calm eyes but never said much about any of them. That afternoon, as Ethan packed up his tools from a small repair job, his phone buzzed. The number wasn't familiar, but he answered anyway. "Is this Ethan?" a man's voice asked. "Yeah, who's this?" "My name's Robert. I work for Ms. Lancaster. She asked me to give you a call. Said you helped her during the storm." Ethan frowned, not recognizing the name at first. "Ms. Lancaster?" "Yes, Margaret Lancaster," the man said. It took him a second, then it clicked. "The woman from the farmhouse." "Oh, her. Is she all right?" "She's fine," the man said. "Actually, she wanted to see you. Said it's important." Ethan hesitated. He wasn't used to people asking for him, especially people who sounded official. Yeah, sure. I can stop by later today." "That would be great," the man said politely. "She'll be expecting you." When he hung up, Ethan sat there for a moment, confused. He didn't know what she could possibly want, but he wasn't the type to ignore someone asking for help. Later that afternoon, he told Lily they were going to visit the lady from the farmhouse again. She was thrilled. "Can I bring her the muffins we made?" "Of course," he said with a grin. They drove down the familiar dirt road, which was still muddy in places from the rain. When they pulled up, there was a new pickup truck parked in the driveway. Ethan noticed 2 men in work shirts unloading supplies near the barn. That was strange. He hadn't seen anyone else there before. He parked beside them and got out. The men nodded politely but kept working. He helped Lily out of the truck and walked toward the porch. The woman was sitting outside, her leg bandaged but resting comfortably on a stool. "Well, look who it is," she said warmly when she saw them. "I was hoping you'd come," Ethan smiled. "I got your message. You doing all right?" "Better every day," she said. "And you brought muffins. I'll take that as a good sign." Lily handed her the small basket proudly. "We made them this morning. I helped mix the batter." The woman laughed softly. "Then they must be perfect." After some tea and small talk, she asked Ethan to walk with her to the back porch. The air smelled like wet grass and new earth. Birds were starting to return, chirping from the nearby trees. I wanted to thank you properly, she said, leaning on her cane, not just for fixing my roof, but for coming back during the storm. You saved me, he shook his head. You don't have to thank me. I just did what anyone would have done. Maybe once, she said softly, but not many people would now. She turned toward the field stretching behind her house. The land seemed endless, green hills rolling out toward the horizon. Ethan had never noticed how far it went before. You see all that? She asked. Yeah, he said. Beautiful land. It was my husband's, she said. We built our life here. Started with 50 acres and over time it grew. He worked day and night to keep it going. After he passed, I couldn't bring myself to leave. Ethan nodded quietly. He understood that kind of attachment. She looked at him for a long moment as if studying his face. You remind me of him. Hands that work hard. Heart that doesn't give up. He smiled a little, not knowing what to say. Just then, the man who had called earlier came around the corner. Ms. Lancaster, he said politely. We've finished clearing the barn roof. Thank you, Robert, she said. You've met Ethan? The man nodded and shook his hand firmly. You did quite a job here, I heard. She speaks highly of you. Ethan looked between them, still confused. I didn't do much, Margaret smiled. You did more than you think. They walked back to the porch and she sat down again. Ethan, I'd like to ask you something, she said. Do you have steady work right now? He hesitated. Not really. I pick up jobs where I can. Some weeks are good, others not so much. Would you be interested in something more permanent? She asked. He blinked. Permanent? Yes, I need someone reliable to manage some of the maintenance across my properties. Fences, roofs, machinery, things that always need fixing. It's honest work and I'd pay well. Plus housing if needed. Ethan stared at her, speechless. You have more properties? She smiled faintly, her eyes twinkling. Quite a few, actually. Before he could ask, the man named Robert cleared his throat politely. Ms. Lancaster owns several farms and rental properties across the county. Her family's been here for generations. Ethan felt his heart skip. Wait, she owns all that land? The man nodded. About half the county, yes. Ethan turned to her, stunned. You're kidding, she chuckled softly. I told you I've lived here a long time. My husband and I built more than just a house. He didn't know what to say. He'd assumed she was just another elderly woman living alone on a struggling farm, not someone who owned nearly half the land around town. She looked at him gently. Does it surprise you? He rubbed the back of his neck. Yeah, a little. I mean, I never would have guessed. That's the point, she said quietly. People treat you differently when they think you have money. I've seen the way people change. But you helped me without knowing a thing about me. That means something. Ethan felt his chest tighten. I wasn't expecting anything. I just wanted to help. And that's exactly why I want to help you, she said. I believe good people deserve good things. If you want the job, it's yours. He hesitated, glancing toward Lily, who was playing by the truck. That's more than generous. But I don't know if I can manage that kind of responsibility. You've been managing your whole life, she said kindly. This is just another kind of work, only now you'll be paid what you're worth. He stood there in silence, overwhelmed. Nobody had ever offered him something like that before. Most days he was just fighting to get by. Think about it, she said softly. No rush, he nodded slowly. All right, I'll think about it. As he and Lily drove home, his mind wouldn't stop racing. Who really was this woman? Why would someone with so much choose to live so simply? And why pick him, of all people, to trust with her property? That night, after putting Lily to bed, he sat at the kitchen table, staring at the small envelope she'd given him earlier. Inside was a check, much larger than anything he'd ever been paid. But more than that, it was the note that got him. It read, "Sometimes helping others repairs more than roofs. It rebuilds faith." He read it twice before folding it carefully and setting it beside his wife's photo. Days passed, and he couldn't stop thinking about her offer. He talked to a few neighbors about her. Everyone knew the name Lancaster, but nobody seemed to really know her personally. They said she kept to herself, lived quietly, and donated to local schools under different names. Finally, one evening, he drove back to the farmhouse. The sunset painted the sky in soft orange light, and the air smelled like blooming grass. She was sitting on the porch again, waiting, almost like she knew he'd come. "I'll take the job," he said simply. She smiled, that kind of smile that came from deep inside. I was hoping you'd say that. He didn't realize it yet, but that decision would mark the beginning of something far bigger than he could imagine. The simple act of fixing her roof had opened a door to a new life, one that would soon test his character, challenge his faith, and reward his heart in ways he never thought possible. For now, though he just stood on that porch, looking out over the land stretching for miles, unaware that his world was about to change forever. After the storm passed, the town slowly began to return to normal. Fallen branches were cleared, roads reopened, and people came out of their homes to check on their neighbors. Ethan spent the next few days fixing small roofs and cleaning up debris for anyone who needed help. He didn't have much money to give, but he had his hands, his tools, and a heart that couldn't say no to someone in need. He hadn't seen Margaret since that terrible night when he carried her out of the collapsing porch. He wanted to check on her, but he didn't want to intrude. Something about her calmness during the storm had stayed with him. She didn't panic or cry. She simply looked at him like she trusted him completely. That moment never left his mind. 3 days after the storm, Ethan finally drove back to her farmhouse. His daughter sat in the passenger seat, holding a small bag of muffins they had baked that morning. The road to the farmhouse was still muddy, but the sky was clear and blue again. When they reached the house, the roof was still damaged and parts of the porch were gone. But the place still stood strong. Margaret came out slowly, using her cane with a smile on her face. "I was wondering when you'd show up again," she said softly. Ethan laughed, feeling relieved to see her well. "I wanted to make sure you were all right," he said. "We brought you something." His daughter shyly stepped forward and handed her the muffins. Margaret's eyes softened. "You two are something special," she said. "Come on in. I was just making tea." Inside, the house still smelled faintly of old wood and dried herbs. It was cozy, even with the broken window covered by a tarp. They sat at the table sipping tea as sunlight spilled through the cracks. Ethan asked if she had anyone to help her rebuild. Margaret shook her head. "No one nearby. My husband passed many years ago. The rest of my family, well, they stay busy in the city." Ethan nodded. "I can help you with the repairs. You don't need to pay me much, just enough to cover the materials." Margaret looked at him carefully. "You really don't need to do that. You've already done enough." But Ethan insisted. "I can't leave it like this. If another storm comes, this place won't stand a chance." After a long pause, she smiled and said, "All right, but I'll make sure you get something for your work." For the next week, Ethan spent every afternoon fixing her porch and patching the rest of the roof. His daughter often came along and helped sweep or hand him nails. Margaret would sit nearby, wrapped in a shawl, telling little stories about her younger days, how she met her husband, how they built this very house with their own hands, and how she loved the smell of rain on freshly cut grass. Ethan noticed small details about her life. The furniture was old but well kept. The walls held pictures, some faded, some new. In most of them, Margaret stood beside a tall man in a hat, always smiling. There was warmth in her eyes when she talked about him, and Ethan could tell those memories were her treasures. One afternoon, while replacing a broken beam, a black car pulled up to the driveway. Ethan stopped working as a well-dressed man stepped out, holding a folder. The man greeted Margaret with a polite nod and said, "Ms. Lancaster, we need your signature on these documents. The county's office has been trying to reach you about the property line agreements." Ethan froze for a moment. He looked at Margaret, who seemed slightly embarrassed. She turned to the man and said, "Can we do this later, Daniel? I have company." Daniel smiled and said, "Of course, ma'am. I'll wait in the car." Ethan went back to work quietly, pretending not to listen. But the name Lancaster echoed in his mind. He had seen that name before. There was a huge sign on the highway just outside town that read, Lancaster Agricultural Holdings. It was one of the biggest landowning families in the state, known for their farms, mills, and even housing developments. After the man left, Ethan couldn't hold his curiosity any longer. "That man called you Ms. Lancaster," he said softly. "As in, the Lancaster family?" Margaret looked at him for a long moment. Then she smiled faintly and said, "Yes, that's me." Ethan blinked, almost laughing in disbelief. "You mean you're part of that Lancaster family? The one that owns half the farmland out here?" She nodded gently. "My husband and I built most of it from nothing. We started small, just like you. But over the years, we bought and managed land across 3 counties. After he passed, I kept to myself. I didn't want to live in the big city or manage things from an office. I just wanted peace. Ethan didn't know what to say. All this time, he thought she was a poor widow struggling to maintain an old farmhouse. And now he realized she could probably buy the entire town if she wanted. I had no idea, he said awkwardly. I wouldn't have treated you any different, I swear. I just wanted to help. Margaret reached out and put her hand over his. I know you didn't do it for money. That's why it means something to me. For the first time, Ethan felt a little uneasy. He had spent his life being overlooked and underestimated. People with money rarely treated him with respect. But Margaret wasn't like that. She looked at him like he was her equal, maybe even someone she admired. As the sun went down, Ethan packed up his tools. Margaret walked him to his truck and said, "You remind me of my husband when he was young. He worked hard and never waited for someone else to solve his problems. That's rare these days." Ethan smiled, a little embarrassed. "I'm just trying to get by, ma'am. Life doesn't give you much choice when you have a kid to feed." Margaret nodded. "You're doing better than you think. You've already given your daughter something most people forget to give, the right example." Her words stayed with him long after he drove away. That night he lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He couldn't stop thinking about how life could surprise you like that. The woman he helped out of pure kindness turned out to be one of the most powerful people in the state. Yet she lived humbly, quietly, like she wanted to disappear into her memories. The next morning, Ethan received a call from an unfamiliar number. It was Margaret's assistant. She asked him to come by the following week to discuss something important. He had no idea what it was, but his heart raced a little. When the day came, Ethan put on his cleanest shirt and drove back to the farmhouse. Margaret greeted him warmly, but this time, a few other people were there, an older lawyer, a young woman with a clipboard, and Daniel, the man from before. "Ethan," Margaret began, "I wanted to thank you again for everything you've done. You didn't just fix my roof, you reminded me that there are still good people out there who act out of kindness, not gain." He smiled modestly. "You don't have to thank me, really. I just did what anyone would do." Margaret shook her head. "No, not anyone. Most people would have driven away that day, but you stopped." Then she turned to the lawyer and said, "Tell him." The lawyer cleared his throat and handed Ethan an envelope. "Ms. Lancaster has decided to appoint you as the head caretaker of her rural properties," he said. "You'll be responsible for supervising maintenance, coordinating repairs, and managing a few workers. The position comes with a stable income and housing." Ethan was speechless. I don't know what to say," Margaret smiled softly. "Say yes. You've earned it." He looked at her, his heart pounding. In 1 week, his entire life had shifted, from being a struggling handyman to being offered a future he could never imagine. He finally found words. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I don't know what I did to deserve this." Margaret's eyes glistened. "You showed kindness when the world looked the other way. That's all anyone ever needs to do." Ethan left that day with the letter in his hand and tears in his eyes. He didn't know what the future would bring, but for the first time in a long time, he felt something deep inside him. Hope. Ethan couldn't stop thinking about the offer Margaret had made. The days after the meeting were strange for him. He went about his usual work, fixing fences, painting barns, and patching roofs for people in town. But every task felt lighter somehow. He kept imagining what life would be like with a steady income, a secure home, and a chance to give Lily a better future. The thought of walking into her farmhouse again filled him with nervous excitement. He had been invited to return not just for work, but because Margaret wanted to personally show him something. When he pulled up in his truck, the sun was shining bright. The air smelled of fresh rain and birds chirped in the trees. Lily hopped out with a basket of apples she had picked from their small garden, eager to see her friend again. Margaret was waiting on the porch, dressed simply, but there was a sparkle in her eyes that made her seem more alive than ever. "Hello, Ethan," she said warmly. "And hello, Lily. I hope you brought something for me." Lily beamed and handed her the basket. Margaret accepted it, laughing softly. "Thank you, my dear. You two are too kind." Ethan walked up, unsure of what was coming next. Margaret motioned for him to sit beside her on the porch swing. The wind rustled the leaves gently and the sun lit up her face. "I've been thinking a lot since the storm," she began, "about how you acted, how you risked time and effort just to help me, and how you cared for your daughter. It's rare to see someone so selfless these days. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. I was just doing what felt right. I didn't think about anything else. That's exactly it, she said. You didn't think about what you would get. You just helped. And that's why I want to do something for you. Something that could change your life. Ethan's heart beat faster. He had no idea what she meant, but he felt a mixture of hope and fear. He had been struggling for years, always trying to keep his little family afloat. But he never imagined that something like this could come to him. Margaret looked over the fields behind her farmhouse. This land, all of it belongs to me. Some of it has been in my family for generations, but I don't want it to sit idle. I want people with good hearts to care for it. She turned to him and said softly, I want you to have a piece of it. Ethan stared at her. A piece? I don't understand. You mean, give it to me? Yes, she said simply. A portion of the farmland. Enough to build a home, raise your daughter, and have your own future. I trust you, Ethan. I trust that you'll care for it as you cared for me. Tears welled up in his eyes. He couldn't speak at first. He had spent years scraping by, always worried about rent, groceries, and bills. He never thought he would see a moment like this where someone believed in him so fully, so unconditionally. Lily, sensing something was happening, stepped closer. Daddy, are we really getting land? She asked, her eyes wide. Ethan knelt and hugged her. Yes, kiddo. We are. Margaret smiled at them both. I want you to know this isn't just land. It's a chance to build something lasting, a place where you and your daughter can thrive without worrying about money or survival. You've earned it through your heart, not your work. For the next few hours, they walked the land together. Margaret showed him the boundaries of the property she wanted him to have. It wasn't the largest section of her estate, but it was fertile, with a small creek running through it and enough space for a modest home, a garden, and some animals if he wished. The trees offered shade and the fields were wide and open, perfect for a child to run freely. As they walked, Margaret shared stories of her husband and how they built their life piece by piece, just like Ethan had been doing with his own family. She told him about the challenges, the small victories, and the importance of holding on to hope, even when life seemed unfair. Ethan listened closely, absorbing every word, and realized how much courage it took for her to trust someone she barely knew with something so valuable. By the end of the walk, they sat under a large oak tree, the sun low in the sky painting everything golden. Margaret handed Ethan a folder. These are the official documents. Once signed, this land is yours. I know it's a lot to take in, but I believe you're ready. Ethan took the papers with trembling hands. He read through each line carefully. Ownership, boundaries, legal responsibilities, it was all there. He looked up at her, his voice shaking. I don't know how to thank you. This is more than I ever imagined. You don't need to thank me, she said. Just promise me one thing. Care for it, teach your daughter to value it, and live honestly. That's all I ask. I promise, he said firmly, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. They spent the evening making plans. Ethan imagined building a small house for himself and Lily, planting a garden and maybe even raising a few chickens. For the first time in years, he could see a future where he didn't have to worry every day about where the next dollar would come from. Lily laughed and ran through the fields, her joy echoing across the property. Margaret watched her, smiling as if the child reminded her of her own past and the hope that life could still offer kindness. Weeks passed, and Ethan began preparing the land. He cleared brush, repaired fences, and started laying the foundation for their new home. Margaret checked in often, bringing over supplies, advice, and her quiet encouragement. She didn't interfere. She trusted him to make decisions, to take ownership of his new life. Ethan worked tirelessly, but he wasn't just fixing the land. He was building a home for his daughter, a future filled with security, laughter, and love. Every evening, he and Lily would sit on the porch of their small temporary shelter watching the sunset, imagining the home they would create together. One afternoon, Margaret came by with a picnic basket. She sat on a blanket under the oak tree with Ethan and Lily. They ate sandwiches, apples, and cookies, sharing stories and laughing together. Margaret told Ethan that true wealth wasn't measured by money, but by the lives you touch and the legacy you leave behind. Ethan realized she had taught him more than just kindness. She had shown him hope, trust, and the power of giving without expecting anything in return. Months passed, and the house was finally ready. It was small but sturdy, filled with warmth and light. Lily had her own room, painted in soft colors with space for her toys, books, and drawings. Ethan looked around, feeling a deep sense of pride. They had worked hard, and now they had a place to call their own. Margaret came for the housewarming. She walked through the room, smiling at each detail. "It's perfect," she said. "You've done an amazing job." Ethan shook his head. "We did it together. Lily helped too." Margaret knelt down to Lily's level. "And you've done a wonderful job taking care of your father and helping on the land." "He's proud of you," Lily beamed. "Thank you, Ms. Margaret." Margaret chuckled softly. "Call me Margaret, or just your friend. Friends are the most important part of life." As the sun set, they all sat on the porch. The fields stretched out before them, golden in the light, peaceful and full of possibility. Ethan looked at Margaret and said quietly, "I don't know how to ever repay you. You changed our lives completely." She smiled, her eyes gentle. "You don't need to repay me. Just live well. That's all I ask." Ethan felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He finally understood that life had a way of surprising you when you least expected it. One small act of kindness, fixing a roof in the middle of a storm, had led to a future he could have only dreamed of. He had a home, security, and most importantly, the chance to raise his daughter in a safe and loving place. That night, Ethan and Lily sat together on the porch, watching the stars appear in the sky. The fields were quiet, the air still, and everything felt right. For the first time in years, Ethan felt a deep sense of peace. They had been through struggles, storms and fear, but now they had hope, trust, and a future full of promise. And as he looked at his daughter's sleeping face that night, he whispered softly, "We made it, kiddo. We really made it." Margaret's gift was more than land. It was a chance, a life-changing moment, and a reminder that kindness never goes unnoticed. Ethan knew he would never forget her trust, and he vowed to live every day honoring it, raising his daughter with the same compassion and honesty that had brought them to this new beginning. The small farmhouse, the fields, the creek, and the trees would forever stand as a symbol, a proof that helping others, even when you have little, can lead to blessings beyond imagination. And for Ethan and Lily, this was just the beginning of a life filled with love, hope, and endless possibilities.